Everyone, my name is Quilian Riano, and first of all I want to thank Phil Ryan for inviting me to talk to you in this professional practice 2 course. I hope that we can start some interesting conversations that we're going to take through the next week and beyond. Again, my name is Quilian Riano. I am a little bit over 40 years old and I live in Shaker Heights, Ohio. Moved here about 1 year ago after being in New York City for a little bit over 10 years. I studied architecture. I have a bachelor's of design in architecture from the University of Florida and a master's of architecture from Howard University's Graduate School of Design. And my practice really combines architecture, urbanism, art, landscapes, all as the problem, the project, the issue calls for it. I currently work at the Cleveland Urban Design Collaborative. The Cleveland Urban Design Collaborative is the community design center attached to Kent State University. For some of you, it might be interesting for us to talk about community design centers, a model, a typology that was created after the political and social movements in the 60s. That then kind of wasn't used too much. There were still a few, some very successful, and currently many universities, including Penn with Penn Praxis, are bringing them back and giving them a new life. I also have my own practice called Design Agency. I ran that for 10 years, and it does art, architecture, urbanism. I've done everything from housing to designs of pavilions and arts projects all over the country and even the world. I also, with the theme that we're gonna be talking about throughout this time around, is gonna be collectivity and cooperatives, collectives. And so I belong to 2, maybe 3 collectives that I'm very proud of. One is the Architecture Lobby. Another one is Dark Matter University, and Dark Matter University is an offshoot of academics and faculty in Design as Protest, another collective group. Both Dark Matter University and DAP come out of the organizing during the current Black Lives Matter movement, organizational protest and actions that have been taken all over the country. This one specifically with a view of what those demands and ideas can translate to in architecture. How long have I been doing this? I started 20 years ago when I was leaving the Air Force. I was in the United States Air Force Station in South Dakota, thinking about what my next steps would be, and really beginning to wonder whether I wanted to go into art or architecture. I had a spot waiting for me at University of Florida. I'm wondering what school I should apply for. I had an experience that in the Air Force, which was that I worked with the Red Horse team. That's the Air Force's engineering team, to help build some wells and other infrastructure in a native reservation that really made me think about architecture and the built environment as a very active place to try to understand what gets built and who does it get built by and who does it benefit. So it began to get imbued with a certain amount of political and social questions. I then went so I graduated undergraduate, went to New Mexico, worked with the organization that now has become Architecture 2030, the biggest nonprofit in architecture looking specifically at the issue of climate change. Helped Ed Masria start that. I was working in his firm when he decided to retire, close it, and just focus on the nonprofit. And then I went to Harvard University, got my master's degree, and then started the practice you see now. I actually haven't really worked too much in architecture firms. I've only done maybe less than a year in a typical architectural firm environment. The rest of my time has been doing research, strategy, and on my own sets of works or in collaborations with other architectural firms or landscape architects. So a little bit of a complicated kind of history, but one that has so far worked for me. I'm going to start with a series of questions that were sent to us. I'm going to start with question number 3. What are you most proud of thus far in your professional path? This could be a project, an event, an idea, or whatever you want. In this case, I think to go back to the theme of collectivity and collectivizing, I think that for me, I'm most proud of being a part of and learning how to organize with groups like the Architecture Lobby, Designers Protest, and Dark Matter University. It all started with during Occupy Wall Street, when one of the questions that really kind of came to mind for me is the level in which some of the issues that were being protested, you could see in the landscape that the privatization of public space as one of the elements and one of the tools in which financial companies were building bigger projects and then negotiating land at the bottom. But then those negotiations, those groups not always following through on those negotiations. For example, Bank of America doesn't always keep its POPs open, and many of the privately owned public spaces in downtown New York are also not open. So I created a collective of artists, urban planners, urban designers, and architects to look at that, and even lawyers to look at that issue. We took actions. We sued at one point New York City. We did mappings. We did actions of really annotating even the materiality of different privately owned public spaces. And we did that for about 2 to 3 years, and that led to a series of projects around collectives or understanding how to work with communities, creating engagement opportunities, etc. Then I started talking. So after the experience of Who Owns Space and that collective work, and then work with the Queens Museum in Corona, etc., I met with Peggy Deemer, the architect and theorist, who was beginning a project called the Architecture Lobby, which it was trying to bring people together to talk about architects as workers. So a little bit standing in opposition to the AIA. That the AIA just looks at, at the piece of the pie for architects, but not architects as individuals, the healthcare, the daycare, the things that we need in order to be able to function. So an organization that could fill those needs. That it has grown, become more politicized, more political in nature. It has taken on more issues, and I have served it in many capacities, including right now I'm on the board. I have been the leader of both the New York City chapter and also different projects, and I'm still working with the cooperative network and a project we're calling Just Design, in which we highlight some very just design, labor practices within architectural practices. That has led me also to a larger interest in cooperatives and collectives. One reason I'm in Cleveland is because Cleveland has some of the best running employee-owned co-ops in the nation. So I've been studying and working with groups like the Evergreen Cooperatives, Cleveland Owns, that are really beginning to use cooperatives and collective ownership of an asset and work and understanding of labor as something that we actively all work on together, as a way to reimagine really entire economies. I'll get to that also a little bit later and talk about that with more detail in a minute. So let's see. Question number 4. What do you do that distinguishes you from your peers? How long did you take to figure that out? It's an interesting question, right? And it also is one in which it forces you to think about how you're different than everyone around you, and it kind of creates a little bit of anxiety in me anyway. But I would say the one thing that maybe I tend to have both in teaching and professional practice that I think might set me apart is that I begin a project not always with an orthodox or any other kind of design idea of what the outcome will be. So I might get in with a group of people that are forming a new urban farm in Phoenix, and hear them out, understand what the community they're working in, the kind of organization that they're wanting to become, the need that they're trying to fill, and create a set of tools for those groups to both work better internally, fundraise. I typically help my my clients fundraise. It's something that sometimes when you're in this kind of more community engaged work, is something you have to do and help them out with, or do a little bit of the work in advance, and then in order to be put into a grant application that may or may not come. But I think that there is something that really kind of helps me. So I tend to, so even within my architecture, I try to create incomplete architectures and landscapes, and many times I take a lot of inspiration in this actually from art and performance and theater. So Theater of the Oppressed specifically has become very helpful for my practice, in which instead of giving a full performance of, as we understand of theater, is a kind of theater that really encourages a breakdown between the performers and the audience. And usually is a way to begin to role play different changes into systematic problems. So that has really created opportunities where now when I see an project, when I start a project, I kind of begin to understand that is what I do maybe is the first line on a much larger essay that's going to be written, and give the opportunities and the places for other people to fill in. In this, I'm actually also inspired by Sol LeWitt and his different kind of instruction-based art projects. I find his work to be just some of the most beautiful and sublime things I've seen, and also the fact that it's being done not necessarily by Sol, but the Sol had the idea and germinated the thing that allowed the individuals, organizations, institutions to actually apply those things and to actually fit the size of the wall, the actual local and specific condition. I find that very, very interesting. So I think that between trying to turn, quite honestly, everything into a game, architecture, urban design, urban planning, so that everything is allowed to have flexibility, growth, change over time. And I think that might be something that makes me different, and also then that I focus on multiple things at the same time. What the rules are, what the structures are, what the places for opportunities for change are, and then also the kind of larger place in which that game or that structure or whatever it is fits within a piece. So I don't know, at least that's something, and then at least tells you a little bit more something about me. Let's see. Now we're moving into question number 5. Where would you like your chosen profession to develop in the next 50 years? This could be a discussion of process, as public responsibility, or an issue that you believe should drive the profession forward. I think that where I would like to see in the next 50 years the profession to go is to become more collectivized. Right now, the architecture lobby has started a project on a cooperative network that we're envisioning, in which small practitioners, which probably a lot of the folks that we're chatting with right now and that we'll be chatting with next week are hoping to be, may not have either the bandwidth or the capacity, or even at times the experience to take on gigantic projects, but they can take on smaller ones, and together they might be able to take on bigger ones. So creating a flexible practice model that really allows individual and small practitioners, where quite honestly I find that most of the innovation usually is, because that's, I think, the most interesting students and graduates become the most interesting small practitioners. They have questions they want answered to compete with the larger companies, which and one of the promises of this kind of collectivity and potentials for small practitioners to really begin to work is to be part of a larger economic model that is collective in nature. So the way we're seeing it is both it allows groups to maybe share resources, to share some of the administrative tasks, to share a whole set of issues, but also to begin to be able to take on projects that they wouldn't be able to otherwise, and to participate again in these larger economic forces that are moving towards more cooperative models and what the Democracy Collaborative is calling a democratic economy. So that's where I hope that we're going, that we are beginning to understand that our practices and our kind of well-being is really connected to others, and that in that kind of place, both it puts us in solidarity with other designers, but then with larger groups, with people that and organizations and institutions that we wouldn't be able to under a completely clientelistic led model. One in which we're waiting, or or we're actively going for projects by clients. We just do exactly what they say. I hope that this then opens up the opportunities to work towards more just projects. It allows more critical voices to question the kind of work that we're doing, who we're doing it for, and why we're doing it, and then who it benefits. So question number 10, what motivates you? I would say a few things. I think number one is a desire to seek interesting situations, precedents, and modes of working. I am very interested, like you have heard, in art and even theater and other critical theory methods. And I am interested in putting them into practice. At one point I even thought about getting a PhD or something like that, but then decided that I didn't want to just study or do scholarly work around it, as important and interesting I think as that path could be, that I really wanted to put this work into practice, that I am curious about how to, I don't know, for lack of a better word, create a better world, and understand which experiments are out there, which models of working, which pilots have existed, which processes by which we work. I honestly think that architecture, in the way that is practiced, typically will not get us there, so we have to look for other places in which different things have been tried, in which different models already exist and work and thrive, and that we can look for. I am really interested in bringing the critical project, the critical project, the project of creating projects, creating built environments through questions, includes social and political issues. I think that is not enough to ask really interesting formal questions, and I was trained in that way and find those sets of questions also interesting, but that a critical process that leaves out the realities, the social, economic, and other kinds of realities that it's incomplete, and it might be temporary. It might be meaning that it's not hitting the moments of the problems of the moment, but in that it becomes important for the history and the story of that specific thing. So I'm very much interested. I mean, for example, how can we have critical design processes that do not take seriously the issue of racism? I mean, in our North American, and I would even make the argument in the entire American North, Central, and South context, it's impossible to ignore these processes that have happened over centuries, and asking the questions around them might actually lead us to more interesting solutions at all scales. And finally, all this together, looking at architectures, urbanisms, projects, all these kind of things that really lead us towards a sense of justice, of what it means to build things for people's all social and economic levels and process. And yeah, it's a difficult thing to talk about. That's why I'm kind of stumbling there, because classifying people is never easy. But basically, usually in every society there are sets of things that really benefit some people and don't benefit other people. Questioning those processes and then finding justice within those, so that people have a little bit more of an even shake in life, is something that I'm interested in. It's something that motivates me, and something that I'm looking for to really put into practice. And in this question, I think something that's important is that usually the people that are working on these experiments, for example, here in Cleveland, people are working in community wealth building projects, don't always consider those as architectural or even design questions. And it motivates me to really talk to those people and let them see that that design has these tools and even an aesthetic project that can really be part of the larger social and economic project that they're after. And within design, pointing design towards those sets of people that are trying some interesting and worthwhile projects. So the final question is question 11. What is the most impactful piece of writing you have read recently? Again, kind of going around these sets of issues, I think honestly that for me, it wasn't like a deep reading or even a scholarly reading, but learning about the Health Anchor Network and understanding what that is and how it's going to move forward is probably one of the most interesting things that deep dives I've done lately. So this rises out of the same group, the Democracy Collaborative, that helped create the Evergreen Cooperatives here in Cleveland, with the concept that having an anchor, health anchor specifically, the Cleveland Clinic, could create economic prosperity for the local communities around it. And it happened that the local communities around the Cleveland Clinic are mostly African American, mostly unemployed, and mostly with salaries at a much lower rate than anyone else around. So the concept here was the Cleveland Clinic has a lot of needs. It's a major institution with lots of purchasing power. Can we create a series of cooperatives that can fulfill some of the needs of the Cleveland Clinic, and by that then making sure that we both erase the racial gap, wage gap, and also create new opportunities for ownership for people that haven't been given those opportunities in the past. So right now the Evergreen Cooperatives do the laundry for the clinic. They give them the most beautiful lettuces created in a very beautiful greenhouse that, as you imagine, Cleveland is not a very tropical place, so it kind of lights with the purple of grow lights in the winter. And they decided to take that model and not so much specifically create the cooperatives that would work with this health, but really organize and collectivize the health institutions into this health anchor network. So many institutions in around this area, Ohio, Pennsylvania, New York, and in the Midwest, are now part of this network, in which these clinics and other anchors are saying that they want to be part of the communities in which they are in. This goes beyond just community benefits agreements, which is something the hospitals usually write with the communities that they're a part of. It goes into really understanding that the clinics need to invest in the future of the residents and the communities in which they live. As part of that, they're seeing opportunities for what we do, for architecture, for urban design. To the investments are physical. So my questions have lately become, and kind of part out of that, is what if we reimagine these things and we begin to look at these major players as places that could help us reimagine not only our economic system but also our spatial and social systems. What would that look like? What is a more collective systems thinking around these civic structures? What are they weighing? This also kind of moves, and then on labor questions, I've been really meditating, thinking about questions around platform capitalism. Platform capitalism is a book that basically begins to talk about the world we live in which, the Uber as a platform, these kind of sets of digital structures, who they benefit and what they do for them. And whether there's a translation here of whether you can have a just platform. And for example, the taxi drivers in Rhode Island have tried to create a more egalitarian employee-owned version of an Uber. So the ownership of the platform becoming more important. But also whether that platform then becomes a social platform, and like in the Health Anchor Network, whether it has even spatial potentials. That's something that, so the combination of those two things. And the platform capitalism for me also It's an interest that moves from Jody Dean's Community Capitalism, an essay in which she writes, it was the first person that I read about 7 to 10 years ago again, began to say that basically, in a way, we all work for Facebook, right? Facebook is the platform. Every like you give is actually money from advertisers for Facebook, and yet we don't get paid. So that her question is, as this kind of communicative capitalism, or that later kind of co-platform, and I think there's some distinctions there, but for now, let's just conflate them and talking about them together. And that the platform is becoming a lot more important than the laborer, and in that it replicates some of the existing and even old structures around labor and how we work and who we work for and who ends up who does most of the work and who ends up making most of the money. That those very systems are just getting replicated. So I urge you all, as potential young architects that are going to go out there, and designers, and some of you are going to be working for people, some of you are going to be creating your own firm, some of you might be doing tons of freelance. So these are all aspects of economy that both will affect you directly, but also affecting the larger systems in which we work. What happens is we have more people in the gig economy. And what does that mean for the future? And are there ways to reimagine that? And then what the role of architecture and design is in those. Well, it's a pleasure to be able to chat with you guys about these issues. I think I've thrown a lot your way. I hope to be able to put a little bit more kind of meat on the bones of this very quick kind of discussion. And please, I'm sure you'll have questions for me when we meet next week. But if I guess I'll leave it open to Phil if he feels comfortable, but ask me any questions that you feel comfortable with. Okay, thank you, and I look forward to seeing you.